So in this video, I'll show you how to make one of these garden boxes. This project I decided to build entirely out of leftover scrapped wood, and most of it is actually this laminate flooring that I had left over. You could also use other wood, but bear in mind that if it's thicker, you may need to use longer screws. Most of the project was actually assembling all of those laminate flooring pieces as well, so it is a little bit tedious, but I actually found it quite fun. To cut the pieces to dimension, all that I used was actually just this jigsaw that I had available with a standard wood blade. And then I'll show you the hardware that is needed for this project. Also just leftover screws. You'll need a minimum of 8 of these longer 6 cm screws, 16 of these 4 cm screws, and then 4, ideally 5 cm screws that you'll see there at the end. The overall dimensions are what you see here, and I came up with these dimensions so that they would fit the planter boxes that I could buy locally. So I'd suggest going to the hardware or landscaping store and just first measuring the planters that you'd like to use, and then add 2 or 3 centimeters in between each planter to come up with the dimensions. In this case, what I really liked about these planters is each one is still light enough to be lifted up by itself. So in terms of the different pieces of wood that are needed, this is the overview. The first 2 x 8s, well, that's the laminate flooring that I used to make the outer shell. The 4 red beams, those are the corner supports that hold the outer shell together. And then, so the bottom 3 pieces that you see there form the support system that goes down the middle to hold up the planter boxes themselves. So for those, I just used 2 2x2s that you see in the light green that go on each of the external ends, and then the light blue plank that goes down the middle and holds the 2 sides together while also serving as a support for the 2 planks across the middle. So here it is completed, just so you can see how that works. Once you lift out each planter box, it can actually be disassembled by lifting out those planks because they just sit on their support beams. And then it actually keeps the whole unit light enough to be lifted with just a single hand even. So that's that blue beam down the middle, and then we have the light green on each end. So once you've designed your planter to fit your planter boxes, then it's just a matter of cutting each piece of wood. I've slowed this down to just the real speed, so you can see it is a little bit slow with the jigsaw, but I didn't really mind. Obviously a good idea to wear some sort of respirator or mask to avoid inhaling the polymer and sawdust mix that this throws out. And I found that it was sufficient to just draw a line on the desired dimension and then just eyeball it, and the ends came out perfectly straight. If you wanted to, you could also use a guide or a rotary saw, or even if you're buying new wood, just get all of these cut to dimension at the hardware store before you leave. One challenge that I did run into, and you may find this as well, is that I ran out of the full length beams. And so I had to make a couple of smaller ones that I could put side by side to make up for one of the long beams not being available. This is just a more detailed view of drawing the line and then cutting with the jigsaw. But overall, though, I found that the laminate flooring was a great material to use for this. And you have 2 choices, really. You could use the side that is intended to be the top of the flooring, but I actually decided to go the other way and use the back of it because it's untreated wood, easier to paint, and also comes with the benefit of not looking like laminate flooring once it's sitting out in the garden. It is fairly thin and strong as a material, though, so it's now been out there for about a year, and it's holding out really well. And as I mentioned earlier, because it is so thin, it's lighter than making the planter box out of 2x4s, for example. If you are using the backside, though, you might find flaws like this, where some of the knots in the wood are missing the heartwood. And so then I just had to be a little bit aware of that in selecting how I cut the pieces. So this is putting one of the sides of the shell together. I wanted to make sure that the top and the bottom beams were continuous. And then what I did is I put the half length beams in between those to hold them in. And I didn't cut them to exactly the same length so that there would be a bit of an offset in where the gap sits, which you'll see as I finish putting this together. In case you're not that familiar with laminate flooring, this is how you get the joints to come together. It can be a little bit different depending on the exact brand of laminate flooring that you're using, but I find that it works pretty well to sort of lift and press down at the same time as pushing pretty firmly towards the piece that you're trying to lock into. And then just to lock it in, flipping it over and walking on it helps. And I put in the next two halfway pieces. And as you can see there, they're offset by about 3 inches from the other piece that has a gap, just so that that gap in the middle isn't continuous. It makes it a little bit stronger and makes it less obvious when you look at it that these were salvaged beams. And then finally the full length beam to kind of lock the whole thing into place. It can be difficult to get them to stick together because there's some slight imperfections, but I eventually got it here, just sort of patiently pushing each side in and then walking on it to seal it. And there it is. So it's almost like a piece of plywood once it's finished. So that's one side done. Next, we'll take a look at how to assemble each of the ends of the planter box. So there's those 2x2s and then the shorter side. And I found that I only needed 4 of the 4cm screws because the pieces are already interlocked together into basically a single piece of almost like plywood. So just the 4 screws was enough. I also left a little bit of extra room at the bottom so that the planter box would not be sitting in water. And so you can see that there's, well, not on this side, but on the side that's facing me, there's a small section of the 2x2s that just stick out at the bottom. So next we'll start putting it together. So there's those end pieces. I laid it out like this. It's just finding the correct distance to put them apart and then laying one of the longer sides on. And again, just 4 of the 4cm screws to hold that together. Same thing on the other side, so 4 more screws. We've just got one more side to put on. It looks like I hadn't actually assembled this side yet, so just putting them together. And there we go. Also looks like I had forgotten to trim the edge there, so I was trimming that off. Next, you need to measure the depth where the support beams are for the planters. That's obviously just subtracting the depth of the planter box that you're going to use, and then making sure that lines up with the top of the support beam. So I'm just taking a couple of measurements here with that ruler. And then that's where the support beams are going to sit. So this is where I used the 5 cm screws, was to put this middle support beam in. And to figure out where those screws go, I just used a pair of magnets, and then you can see that right beneath where that magnet is going to be right in the center line of that piece of wood. And then once it's done, you can see how it all fits together here. And because those support planks are just resting freely, they can easily be removed. And once all of the pieces are taken out, the planter box itself, I'd say it's maybe 30 or 40 pounds, but it's not too bad to lift it up, even with one hand, just by lifting that middle support beam, as you'll see here. So, easy to move around. And once it's all put together, it's just a matter of painting it. So I used some outdoor deck stain, actually, but I found this nice red colored one. You can see how it dries with the finished planter box in the back there. And I ended up needing 2 coats, and that was fine. It has so far lasted really well. I've actually left mine outside for the winter, and it's gotten plenty of snow and rain, but it seems to be holding together really well. So we're almost done here. I won't show putting the second coat on, but that gives you the idea. And then here it is finished with the strawberries, Japanese shiso, some beans, and some cucumbers. Thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed the video.